something 2 is something with the name Tia. And what is not built into our struct here is the ability to say, let the comparison equal something 1 greater than, or for now let's just say less than, something 2. So when I go to run this, it says binary operator. You might have seen this before in the past. The less than sign cannot be applied to two somethings. So when we conform to comparable, we are literally telling the program, here is how you compare two things like this. You're defining what the less than sign does. What is the less than sign doing right now? Aaron.
Less than sign is, well, it's saying less than. So it's comparing the left hand side and right hand side.
What's the actual comparison it's making?
Oh, between the names. And is it looking at the first alphabetical letter? First alphabetical?
Yeah.
And it's comparing to see if, well, we said that A was small and C was bigger. Is that what we're saying? So since D is bigger than T, since D is smaller than T, then it should compare to true. Output to true.
Cool. So the value of the comparison is true. Nice. Phoenix.
Does the direction of the operator after the static function matter? Because you're
So actually, it does, because when we create a comparable, when we conform to comparable, it literally says the only thing you need to conform, the stub's going to come up, is the less than operator. So if we go and look at comparable in its definition, it's a protocol, it's got a static func that's less than, it's got a static func that's less than or equal to, it's got all of these ones, but all it asks you to implement is less than, because it can use the logic of less than to figure out the other ones. So just like any other protocol, it might have optional and it might have required functions. And the only one we need to implement is less than. So they could have done it with greater than and just reversed the logic for the other stuff. But it just happens to be the implementation. I'm sure there's a better reason than the one I'm telling you. But the whole point of comparable is when you are making your custom types, you can outline to people, not a great explanation, you can outline how two things of that type can be compared. So if you don't conform to comparable and you have a new type, then you can't use the comparison operators. So you can literally go into your code and define how those operators work. That's what the protocol comparable does. I think we've seen it a couple times, but I want you to just be aware there's a very specific behavior that you are getting from this protocol. It's a question about logical comparison. And you are literally defining how that logical comparison is going to work. So if you need to compare stuff, but you are making that stuff into a new type, you should probably use comparable. Allison.
So, just because I know that you can compare obviously int to int, strings to string. When you're using the protocol, you're basically allowing for the comparison between a struct and a struct.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I could outside. Yeah, the question was, you can compare strings to strings, ints to ints, and so on with those what we call primitive data types, like those built-in data types that really don't have any other implementation besides how they work. We're making our own structs, or we're making our own types here. We use this comparable to be able to do the same thing that we do with ints or strings in their comparisons. So that's what this is for. We could just do this operation, left-hand side dot name is less than right-hand side dot name, but maybe we want to define just how these structs work without having to go ahead and look at the properties and compare those properties. So here we're saying, okay, this something I created, I want it to, when you make a comparison with it, I want you to be able to just compare stuff without needing to even look at the data in it. Sunny? Okay. Cool. So this is like a very basic, not basic, a very fundamental like programming thing. We can say how things are compared logically. Like this is super powerful. I want to show you one more super powerful protocol, which I think you've seen before as well. And it's weird and kind of abstract, but it's the name of my file. Does anyone remember what? Did anyone use it and can tell me about it maybe? Eric. Okay. The name of my file is string convertible. Does anyone remember a protocol that has some of those words in it? Jason? Cool. So, custom string convertible. Let's have a look. If I say that this also conforms to custom string convertible, it's going to also tell us you need this one stub. And that stub is just something called description. So in order to implement custom string convertible, in order to implement this, I need a property called description. Description is going to do some wild things. So let's say I set description equal to, this is the description. Custom string convertible literally means, how does an object of this type convert to a string? So to get rid of those errors, I'm just going to make a custom init function that just takes a name and says self.name is equal to name. And description already has a value because we've given it one. So here's the weird thing. This is how we used comparable, the protocol, on our something. When I go and try to convert something one to a string, what do we expect the value of this to be? A string of characters. So what do we expect the actual value of this to be? Oh wait, lost the string convertible. Let's just use this for now as well. Don't worry about what that does. Aaron.
The class and then the name.
So normally, if we didn't conform to custom string convertible, Jesus Christ, shut up. Okay, great. So normally if we printed out something like this, that's very true. We would print out like, it would print a something which has some properties in it, right? What custom string convertible is actually doing is it's saying how this something converts to a string. And that process is in our description. So now literally when I try to change the type of a something to a string, the value becomes whatever value description has. So you're changing both what this gets turned into as a string and what happens when you print it. So if I print something one, It literally just prints out whatever we said description should be. Yes?
Would you need to define the description in the struct, or can you define this description outside the struct? Like, would you capture it like in var something?
That's a very good question. Let's give it a try. So since it's a var right here, let's see if we can set the description property for something 1. This is another description. Cool. So we've updated that property. This is a great place where we might use a computed property. Instead of saying, hey, here's what the value actually is, we might say, to get one of these, you should return, and again, the return has to be the same type that we've annotated. Return, my name is, interpolating self.name. So again, this is how our something, literally how it gets converted into a string. It works on that very basic level. So if I go down here and I run it, my name is David, is the new string that we see when it's converted to a string. And when I print the object which is of type something, the custom string convertible protocol says, I'm going to go look at description and figure out how we get that value, which is a computed value that just says my name is, and then interpolates that name property. So custom string convertible is literally how you are converting something of your type to a string. Comparable and custom string convertible are super powerful because you can add these to any type and make them do something specific and fundamental to that type. You're fundamentally telling your program, here is how you compare these two things. And then you're also saying with custom string convertible, hey, this is how you should turn things into strings. What are some questions you have? Because this is pretty wild. It's not pretty wild. That's okay. Getting a whole bunch of errors, I know. Yes? Can I still just access the name? That's a great question. So now when I start typing, let's say, this is the conversion. When I start typing this is the conversion, I just have a string. So I just have the value of whatever that string, that description is. I no longer even know that this used to be a something. Think of it just like a return, right? I've said, give me what we return when we convert this something to a string, and description tells me how exactly I do that. And now we just have a string. We just have the value for a string. Like this line is the same thing as saying, turn the int 23 into a string. The value of this is the conversion now is a string. It's a string with the two characters 2 and 3 in it. And the conversion here is the same thing. It's just a string that you can append characters to, get the count of, just like you might any other string. It no longer knows that it's related to an object called that is of type something.
So in 928, you do something 1.name that would work.
Something 1.name. I'm sorry?
Not name that would work.
What was that last part?
I'm not saying that, I'm saying that.
This?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a property on our object. This constant is just us getting a value by using a something and converting it to a string. So this is accessing a property just like we're used to with objects. This is converting an object to a string. I would encourage you to practice even with silly examples like these, because you're going to use these a lot. Sunny.
For our description in this case, did you choose to give it the type string, or is it always going to be a string
Let's see.
for this protocol?
So now it's going to protest, and it's going to give us our stubs. Add my stubs. So it must be a string.
And then another question is, can you give an example of what if you were to have the description be a get set?
Yeah. Get set. Let's say you try to set description like we did this just before. Something 1.description is equal to this is another thing. We might, since this is computed, that doesn't store, right? Instead, we have to say, where does this get stored? Or we could do something as simple as, every time this is set, say print, they set something new. As long as the get returns a string, and set just does something, think of set as like similar to our did set property observer. It's just waiting to see that you set something, and then it's responding to that. So I could print this. I could set the value of name. So I could say self.name is equal to whatever that new value is. So now if we run it, we're going to get something weird. I printed out name here, but then if I go to see what the conversion was, or maybe let me just print this differently. If I print out something one, it says my name is, because that's the format for the get, but then we set the description property here, so the whole value for name got replaced with what we set it as. So we get this weird line, my name is, this is another string, because that's the actual string that gets assigned to name, from which, when we use our get, we get the value that's interpolated here. Yes?
Would you return a string that says my name is value, or would you have to assign a new value to something first?
These just, they work separately. They don't work at the same time. They have different cases, right? A get is when you go to get the value. Set is when you go to set the value. So new value is just kind of any old word that you can use there. I think you could use other words, but I've never tried. So let's try that. Let's see what happens.
I bet this is two strings with the value, so we have to assign our variable first.
Where do you want to interpolate it?
Like return my name is value.
In the set. So the set isn't returning, the set is assigning. Like the set is this writing process. So it doesn't need to return anything. It could print, you could use it like any old function, and you can have it do any old thing. But to be meaningful, you'd probably have it set description in a specific way. I bring this up because you're going to see get and set and property observers like did set and will set all the time, especially with views. And as we saw yesterday during our, what did we make yesterday? Text twist. During text twist, like there were really good ways to use property observers instead of functions so that when something was updated, you could, when a value was updated in the view controller, you would just say to the view, go update something. Or when a value was updated in the controller, you could say to the model, go update something. Ideally, you can use those property observers a lot, or you can use computed properties like these a lot. Especially if, say you've got a view that's saved, if you have a get for that view, your controller will go look at the model. And now you've correctly separated the responsibilities of the view, controller, and model, as opposed to just setting the value of your UI view equal to something from the model. So using computed properties and property observers will help you separate out those responsibilities much more like distinctly. And then you will thank yourself when you go back and look at your code, because you will know where everything is and why it's there and why it does that. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to get rid of that. Shouldn't have closed Xcode. Today we are talking about something completely new. Are you excited? So we're going to talk about an awesome feature of Interface Builder. Come on. No, I feel bullied. I shouldn't express enthusiasm anymore. We're going to talk about something called auto layout. Oh, sorry, hang on one sec. I like to follow along. So, auto layout is, if you might have noticed, when we make apps, we have this awesome ability to use our interface builder to just drop in stuff like a label, and it tells us it's centered. Drop in something like a button, and we get these blue lines that really help us out. This is centered both horizontally and vertically. I can change all the colors. I can change the background. I'm gonna make this one this orange. Make this one the orange. Let's run it. Let's just see what happens with the UI. Come on. Come on. All right, we've got our app. It's running. The label and the button are going to show in just a bit. Come on now, buddy. Cool. The label and the button have shown. We placed them in Interface Builder in a spot. We said this is where you're going to go when I lay out my screen. Does anyone remember how to rotate the phone in Simulator? Command arrows. What do we notice is happening? We lose our button. Labels in a different spot every time. This kind of sucks, right? Because our view controller is only set up to handle this portrait mode, and it's not set up for things to move either. All it's doing is it's placing those things there, and then it's saying, all right, well, when you tried to rotate the view, I just made sure that the label was still aligned for this vertical alignment that we see in the view controller. So I'm just going to leave it like that. I don't really care what you do. Now it rotates the phone again. It rotates the phone again. So Interface Builder allows us to place things there, but it doesn't know what their relationship to the space should be. It doesn't know that we want this button to be centered in any app that we have. It just puts it in the center when we launch the app. It doesn't know that this label should be horizontally centered. It just knows that it should be, when we launch the app, right in the middle. Interface Builder has this really, really awesome and helpful tool called Auto Layout, which says to each view and to maybe their super view or to other elements, this is how you should be arranged. So the simplest auto layout that we can create is we can do a click and drag from our label to the super view, which is just the view. This is self.view in the view controller. And then we see some options. These options are saying, what's going to be the relationship from our view, which right now is a label, to the view controller, or sorry, the outermost view in this view controller. We can select trailing space to safe area. We can select top space to safe area. We can select center horizontally in safe area. We can set a whole bunch of properties that we have to all understand how to use, or else they won't work the way that we want. But what these are literally saying is, hey, I am a thing called auto layout. I'm a thing called auto layout. I create constraints for views. I constrain them by saying what their relationship to other views and to themselves should be. So here are, if you look at this ruler thing, I think it's called the size inspector. If you look at the size inspector, you'll see those constraints we just made. What this is saying is, hey, when you launch the app, make sure my label is aligned to the center of the safe space. Make sure that it has a trailing distance from the safe space. So trailing meaning be to the left of it, as opposed to leading, which means be to the right of it. And then make sure that I am aligned to the top, so my distance from the top is some number. Does anyone know what these numbers are? Does anyone know what the unit we're using here is? Can someone raise their hand? Albert. So these are measuring in pixels. Your screen is built so that you can know how far the distance between things is in pixels. Because ultimately, you could add things that are 1 pixel wide and 1 pixel tall all throughout your app. You can account for every pixel on your screen. A lot of apps do that. A lot of apps don't. Aaron. Points that translate into pixels. Yes. Can you describe why that is? Where'd you go?
Yeah, that's because, well, different devices have different resolutions, aka pixel resolution. This one we don't have to think about, okay, making a screen, you know, icon here very small on 6S equals to like plus. But basically you said one method of measurement, which is points.
Cool. Yes, Levi.
These points that we are setting, are they fixed or are they proportional? Meaning, is that a fixed distance and it will still be that distance?
Really good question. What do you think? I would agree. So at the moment, the space trailing and the space to top are a fixed distance, a fixed number of points, thank you, Aaron, from wherever it says it is trailing and wherever it says it is looking at the top to be. So that is a set number of points. We can also talk about that relation, which we'll do after a quick break. We can talk about the relation to the screen itself, where if you think about it like a coordinate map, 0, 0 is up here in the top left, and then the x values increase as you go horizontally, and the y values increase as you go down. So from the top left, you only have positive x and y values as you move in either of those directions. So going down is increasing y, which is a little different than like the coordinate plane that we've seen in math. So let's add some more constraints and see if this fixes the problem of rotation. I'm going to say that we should center this button both horizontally and vertically. Now let's try to build this app. So we've seen this app before. Let's see what happens when I rotate it. Our button stays centered horizontally and vertically. Let's see what happened with our label. If you remember, our label had to be a fixed distance from some certain thing. It also had to be centered. So it's 186 points trailing to the safe space. The distance here is 186 points. The distance from the top is 214 points, just like we said. And now it's trying to resize itself to fit back in the space in the way that we said it should, where it's both centered and this distance. If we wanted it to stay a fixed size, we can set a constraint to self. If I took out, you can remove constraints just by highlighting them and deleting them. I can drag this constraint, I can drag from this view to itself to explicitly set its width and explicitly, I guess we don't need to set height. Hang on one sec. Okay. I can set its width. I can also set the ratio of width to height. Let's see if this works. If it fixes our problem. Interesting. So now that it's no longer centered, it moved to the right so that it's 186 points to the right side, 214 to the top side, and so that its width is 42 exactly points. And if we look at the ratio, the height would probably be 21 points. So there is a lot of measurement and visual space to account for with this auto layout stuff. That's why when I start making an app, I usually just start with centered things, because then I can determine from there, hey, from the middle, how far should this be? And we're going to take that break, but the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get into how we can use auto layout to relate views to each other in the super view, rather than just where they should be on the screen itself. So now if I rotate it, my button and my label try to do their best to conform to their constraints. What are some questions? I think this is really something you need to try as opposed to see. Yes, Kimball.
I'm not getting the right hand menu that you did.
It's the ruler.
I got the movement, but I'm not getting the same
Are you selecting one of the views? What are you clicked on? Look in the document outline. This guy. So if I'm clicking on the button, you should see button up here. All right, let's look at it after the break. Michelle. Yeah, to set the sizing for my label, I just right-clicked and dragged to that label.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, to set the sizing for my label, I just right-clicked, and instead of like releasing it on the view to do a comparison with the view, I just released it on the label itself, which lets me set the properties for my labels. It's a weird way to think of it, but it's relation to itself. So it's width, making it 42. Its height, making it some aspect ratio to that.
So when I try to do that, I put an aspect ratio and set it to the superset, not the label.
Are you dragging it to the label itself? It'll give you a different menu when you're looking at the super view versus the view itself. Auto layout is super, super powerful because you will not have to go into your code and say this is how far things should be. You can just use these constraints. That's cool. Just select over here, hit backspace. Okay, let's take a break.
I totally missed that part of
What the heck? What the heck? So click on the whatever the UI element is. If you two finger from the element itself, or you could do it there. If you two finger click and drag to there and let go. So you deselected it. Anywhere in this view, it's going to say, okay, what should be the spatial relationship between my label and that view? So you can say, I want to set this amount of top space to the safe area, so the current distance from the top that it is. You could say I want to set the bottom space, you could say I want to center it horizontally or vertically, you can do all that stuff.
So what's the first option?
See if you can recreate those two. Cool. That's fine. Anywhere is fine. So trailing means how far before this thing should I be?
Sorry, say that
Leading.
again.
Yep.
Trailing.
Trailing means how far before. So how far to the left should I be? Leading means how far maybe ahead or how far to the right should I be? So looks like it's a line centered and it's got a top. You didn't set the trailing space, but let's test out how this looks.
And how do you flip it again?
Just
arrows,
command
right?
and an arrow, yeah. go? Where'd it go? There it is. Okay. So it's centered and it's a set distance from the top.
Okay. Thanks.
Hello, Michelle. How's it going?
Why is it that my ratio is 43:20 instead of being able to be 2:1?
Very good question. I think it's because we're going to get into what these things mean in just a second, but this says you set a constraint, so that this is 42, but I'm now seeing that what you actually changed in your UI made its width +1 from what that constraint was. So at some point, maybe you like slightly dragged that right edge or that left edge, and its size on the screen now is 43 points. And so its height is 20. And so it's saying like that is the ratio that you set. And so that's what I'm trying to do for you. And in order to do that, you should update the constraint. So I'm going to show you all the different ways we can do that. Right now it's a little confused. So if we try to run it, it might not run exactly in the way that you think. And what it usually asks is that you resolve these like things. Cool. Start rotating it. Nice. Cool. So that's just like specifically like how many points do those involve. And there's a way that we resolve it, which we're gonna yeah. Hey.
So it's not
Oh, thank you. I get them for free in the staff office, so you can just keep it.
Is that why you
I
gave
appreciate
it
that,
to me?
though.
Wow.
Sorry, Kimball, what's going on? Let's have a look, see.
I'm not giving the same look on label. So that's all I'm getting.
Look at that label. Wow.
She's like, oh. We have a brand called Virgin Pop. That's the best.
So interesting. Check this out.
I'm proud, probably very proud of this.
See if this did anything.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
I don't know what I did. But I think
I
that's
to check with her on I've not seen that menu. I'm sure you can look at that. Sure. Okay. Hello. So, let's keep going. Let's keep using auto layout. Our label here is a set distance from the top and from the right side. So trailing to the safe space and align top to the safe space. We'll get into more of what the meat of the safe space is in a bit. Oh, my phone is rotated. Great. So I know it seems obvious, but I just want to emphasize this label looks centered when we're in our portrait mode, but setting the constraints to be a set distance is not the same as setting them to be centered. Because obviously when we rotate it, it tries to stay that distance rather than centered. Let's break our constraints a little bit here. So if I move this, I get these little highlights here. I'm sure someone knows a better hotkey for this than me. But what it's trying to say is, hey, you had a constraint on your label, and it looks like your alignment to the safe space was 186, but I noticed that it changed by 64 points when you moved that. And I also noticed that you moved it up. So it changed by 32 points from what your alignment to the top used to be. The constraints are different. Do you want me to change them? So it's giving you, think of these like interface builders, like cautions for you. They're not going to crash the app, but they're saying you did something in interface builder that looks different than what I have saved to it. So maybe you want to figure out if you want to do those things. What you're also going to see is you can look at these things over in the error, what do we call this? The error navigator, the issue navigator. You can also look in the document outline, which if we take a look, lists the constraints, which is super cool. So our view has a set of constraints. That's very helpful because now we can see what things are. It'll highlight for us exactly what the constraint is. It'll also, if we click this arrow, that arrow means there's something going on with the constraints. If I click it, it says, I expected this label. It says this label is misplaced. Let's start from there. This label is misplaced. I expected it to be at a certain X position and a certain Y position. I expected it to be these distances from the sides and the top, but the way you have it placed in the UI is a little different. So you can click on that caution triangle and you can say update frame, which sets the frame to match the constraints. So if you update frame, it's going to move it back to be visually in the position of the constraints that you set. So if I hit fix misplacement, it moves it back. But let's say I actually want to update the constraints. I want to change the values of the relationships I set up between this and the safe space. I can click that arrow. I can say update constraints. And then it changes the values of those constraints. So you don't have to go in to each constraint and necessarily edit the value. You can do this. It gives you this edit function. But it's probably much easier to just move it where you want it to go and then update either the frame or the constraints. So, let me find a place to write this down. I want you all to done. Cool. I'd love you all to set up a view controller with a button that is centered horizontally. I just want to mention, I always get confused about this, so maybe other people do or do not, but the vertical line down the middle means I'm centered horizontally. Just, I get that mixed up, so if you also get it mixed up, no, this vertical line means it's in the middle horizontally. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I confuse that all the time. So I just want to say that. This means it's horizontally in the middle, and then if I see the vertical line, that means it's vertically in the middle. If you are looking for these guidelines to tell you what to do. So I'm going to reset this, update my constraints, fix misplacement. So set up a view controller with a button that is centered horizontally and 200 points from the top, and add a label that is centered vertically and also centered horizontally. So give that a try. Create your own view controllers. Let's take 12 minutes. Plus. All right. And if you were able to do that, ready? If you were able to do that, remove the constraints from your button to the super view, and instead, ready? Set your button's constraints so that they are related to the label. So step 2, put your button where you want, remove its constraints to the super view, and instead only have it be constrained to the label.
So it's gonna override what we did in step 1 then.
You're going to verbally, yes, you're going to change what you did in step 1. So you want it to be in the same location, but you want it to be relating to the not the super view, but the label instead. Give it a shot. The super view is self.view for the view controller. The view controller isn't actually visual. It's a controller. So if you just came back, there's now step 2. Do the step 2. Boom.
I wouldn't worry about rotating. I would be worried about the rotating to make sure rotating it like a it's like I wouldn't worry oh, I mean, probably yeah. I would just like yeah, it's a lot of like, oh, making transits like,
We need more time. Or does someone want to come up and do it for us? Yeah, don't try to do it. Alright, let's emails where I'm talking shit about you.
Okay, yeah. Appreciate that. Carmen, sorry. It's Carmen.
JK. Okay, so here you go. The stage is yours.
All right.
It's not here. It's only there.
Okay. I'm not sure I
Guys,
know
it's gonna be
what
our
I'm
attention
doing.
here. As he walks you through it, and maybe you can help him out as well. I would say to start, you can just delete my label and my content.
Okay.
Just do it. Get rid of them. It's I don't like yours.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to create a label and a button.
It's not.
And I'm going to start by centering the label vertically and horizontally. And then trying to fix, update constraints. That didn't do what I thought it was going to do. I don't know why that didn't do that.
Hit Control Z. Cool. So if you click your label, look on the right side. It says it should be aligned to center and it should be aligned to center.
Says
Center
that.
X and center Y.
Yes.
So the values for those are correct. So what do you actually want to change? Your constraints or where the label appears on your screen right now?
Where the label appears on my screen.
So if you go to the misplaced view,
Okay.
click that guy, you can update the frame, which is going to update how it looks on your screen.
Gotcha.
So that it is matching the constraints.
So if I had wanted it off-centered and it was centered on the screen, update constraints would move it to the off-centered location. Okay. All right, so now that I have the label centered, I want to get the button to initially start off 200 pixels. Is that the right word? From the top?
I guess points.
Points. So top space to safe area. I'm going to set that, and then I'm going to come down to the tab over here and click Edit, and I'm going to set that equal to 200. And that should move it 200 from the top. You should have to center it horizontally, which I'm just going to skip because we're going to do that in a second anyway. So I'm going to draw, does that matter? I'm going to draw a line from the button down to the label here. And I'm going to say center horizontally, which is going to move it over the middle of the label. I don't know if I need to do this, but I'm going to delete the alignment from the top here. This is what I did before, at least. And then I'm drawing another line using Control down to the label. And I'm going to say vertical spacing. And that should keep it 200, I shouldn't say 200, that should keep it, I guess, 168.5 above the label.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the values change or are different from the distance from the top?
I mean, I think it still is 200 from the top. It's just now the distance of it being 200 from the top makes it 168.5 from the label.
Good. That makes sense, yeah.
And that's all I did.
Does it work? Good. Cool. Thanks, Ian. I'm going to pass. No questions. Tia, what was your question?
About setting the button 200 from the top, down the lower right-hand corner versus what you have the y-axis.
In here? Yeah, so this is saying for the current screen that we're looking at, that we're simulating, this is the actual position. It's not the constraints, it's saying that's the position on the screen. So if I move it, you see the y value decreased in the view because it's going closer to 0, 0.
Right, so then, should it be equal if you set it there to 200 and it's the constraints? 200 from the top? Should that be equal?
No, and for a specific reason. Does anyone want to share maybe what they think is why? Shouldn't, so if we're looking at the button, shouldn't the y, which is the vertical distance from the top left of the phone to our view, shouldn't the y be 200 as well? A very good question. What are some guesses as to why they're not matching?
0, 0 starts above where the save view is, or the view is, so that you can't access 0, 0.
Interesting. So if I move it now closer to the top left, now it's at 0, 0. So our constraint was from the safe space, which is like a good rule of thumb. Don't put stuff in the safe space. Try to keep everything within it, which is why it suggests to you when we go and we look at our view just has built in an outline that is the safe space. So this is why we have that. It's like there are certain parts of our screen that probably shouldn't be used. Sunny?
Remember my simulation doesn't rotate. I can rotate it, it stays fixed. So like if I rotate it upside down, the text label, button label will be upside down as well.
For each position or only for one?
For all positions.
All rotations. Okay, can you tell us about your constraints?
My label, well, it starts with a button. It's a line centered to X. And then X the label, so it's the line, it's the label vertically. And then it has a certain amount of space between the label. And then my label. I think I found a problem.
Okay,
And it's also aligned to the label, the button.
yeah. So constraints are very much a trial and error process. You'll get better at them, but you got to see what they do and how they break in order to know how they work, which is really fun. I saw some other hand. Adam?
When I was looking at mine, like, they like stretch up together.
Sorry, can you say that a little louder?
Not saying when I was looking at mine, they like stretch up together.
They scrunched up together. Guys, let's bring it up front. Tell us more. Tell us about your constraints.
Well, basically,
You can just read them to us.
I don't know what to read.
Just look on the right side over here with the little ruler.
Okay, so I have the button on mine trailing to the label.
Trailing.
Yeah.
Is that it? Is there anything vertically?
No.
Okay, you probably need a vertical constraint so that you can keep them a certain distance.
Okay.
So think about how things appear on a screen. You need to know both their horizontal situation and their vertical situation. Our label only has constraints to the super view, so the outermost view in this view controller. Think of that as like, let's use the term absolute positioning. So think of the view as just the screen. In the screen, my label is centered for X and Y. So that's like the absolute position. Just in the middle of the screen in both vertical and horizontal directions. Our button has a position that's relative, bless you. It's relative, it's centered relative to the label, and, bless you, it has some bottom space that's relative to that label as well. So if I moved my label and I changed its constraints, then now when I update those constraints instead of that frame, if you look, it also updated the constraints for our button because those depend on the label's position and its constraints. Why didn't the button move too? Because I updated the constraints and not the frame. So I updated where the label goes, and it's just going to update the constraints for the button in the current setup, in the current distance that they are from each other in that view, right? When we hit update constraints, it says, I'm going to make sure those constraints match how this is visually laid out right now. How's it going to look? It's going to look not super visually appealing. Let's have a look. Adam, did you have a question? Say that again? What if you have an app that you bless you don't want people to rotate? Let's go to my friend. Why do you guys hate my friend? What? I can't. Goggle? Yeah, it's Goggle. For those listening, this is called Goggle. So let's check. What are some search terms we could use? Adam's question was, what if I don't want my phone to rotate? Aaron.
Google, Apple, let you rotate.
Rotate in Xcode. Let's see what comes up. We'll let you rotate your recorded videos. Did rotate. If the screen doesn't rotate. Let's change that question up a little bit. Adam, tell me about the question that you had. All right, let's see. Orientation lock. Cool, that's a cool term. How to enable and disable rotation on each view controller. I don't know. I think they're saying, I want this format. How can I do that? Let's see if there's an answer. There's an answer. And this answer has a check mark, which is like people definitely agreed with it. And then, so people can upvote on Stack Overflow, and then the check mark says the original asker thinks this is the right answer. So think of that as like verified. Whoever asked the question got the answer they were looking for. I have the answer. On app delegate, if you rotate device, push controller, etc., this function will always call. We've never seen this before, right? There's a better way. There's an easier way. Is it something like this in the view controller? Oh, wow. Hold on, I want to Google it. Is it in Interface Builder?
No, it's part of like an Xcode project hierarchy.
Xcode project hierarchy. The thing.
Yeah.
Oh, like here?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's learn more about what a project is in Xcode. How to prevent screen rotate in Xcode project hierarchy. My view controller supports auto rotation. How do you stop iOS from changing orientation? Nope, that looks like it's on your phone. How do I force the orientation of an app? How do I make my app portrait only? Let's go to, do you want to do targets or do you want to go to project?
Project.
Oh man, okay. Let's see if this one works though.
I think I'm a target.
Okay. Xcode, select your project. So this scary looking thing with the blueprint on it is the project settings. It's how you can do a whole bunch of crap. You can connect to a team, an Apple developer team. So if you're all on a team and you're all members that set it up on Apple's developer program, you could all be developing apps that maybe you store on some like version control website, some hub for Git stuff. What? What did someone call it? What? No? Okay. What? Wow.
Are you trying to lead into GitHub?
Yeah, it's GitHub. So this is not GitHub, but say you're collaborating and you're on an Apple developer team, what you can do is you can all link to the same app and you can create builds of that app and you can push it to the App Store as a member of that team with all the project settings in this signing part. There's also deployment info. You can pick what operating system version you want your app to deploy as. You can pick universal, you can pick if it's only an iPhone, you can pick if it's only an iPad. You can develop iPhone and iPad apps separately. You can also develop specifically for each device. We're not really going to get into that. But yeah, sorry, we are going to get into that. Hey, Iram, was this it?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, man. So if I go to device orientation, I can check and uncheck the directions I want it to work in. Now if I go to simulator, it's just rotating the device as if it's in my hand, as opposed to trying to rotate the view of the view controller. So Adam, like this is just your hand at work. It's not changing, like this right here is just as if I had locked my rotation on my phone and said, you can only look at this in one direction, a little lock key. So now nothing's going to change as I turn it. That's what's happening in our simulator. It's not trying to resize the view. It's not trying to do anything else. It's just showing you what it looks like to turn it. That's weird, huh? And that's why, if you look from what I had before, I think I didn't have upside down set up. So one of them appears to be weird and set up incorrectly because it's not supporting upside down. So I just don't have upside down selected here. The other ones work, but when I go to make my device upside down, it doesn't try to resize the view. It doesn't change the device orientation in my code. It's just as if I had locked it in this portrait, in this landscape, and then turned it in my hand. But now it'll update because this landscape right is available, and portrait up, is that what it's called? Portrait is available. What do you guys think of that? Cool, wow. Tia.
It feels like it's really complicated to organize buttons so that
I agree. Continue.
can you just set your criteria for portrait and then set different criteria for landscape? So
Ooh.
just go from one to the other.
Let's check it out. So I'm going to go to my friend. His name is Google. What's our question, Tia? Okay. So let's say auto layout can have different constraints for orientation. Okay. How to handle portrait and landscape in auto layout. Apple has a whole new tool for handling different device sizes. They call it making your apps adaptive, but confusing at first. How do I make this bigger? Get bigger, get bigger, get bigger. Okay. Great and app and stick a button in the middle. Okay. So I'm not going to read this because I don't trust that this person, like, I'm sorry, but they might not be native English speaking and they might not have the best descriptions for things and how I want them. I hope no one took offense to that, but it might be more readable to use something else.
That is so racist.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. If you didn't know who said that, it was Adam Jackson. He is the white knight here. iOS, how to add adaptive constraints to support a universal app. Interface Builder allows us to configure layouts which will automatically change shape and size based on a range of environment variables such as device screen, device orientation, adaptation. We'll learn how to add NSLayers constraints in Interface Builder which adapt to changes in these variables. Terminology, device configuration, size class. All right, let's just keep scrolling. I'm sure we could all read this later. Our goal is to add constraints which adapt and change based on environment variables. This will result in 3 layout variations. Cool. So they want to have constraints that adapt and change based on iPhone being in portrait, iPhone being in landscape, and iPad being in portrait or landscape. Cool. Let's take a glance at this. I don't want to implement it, but I'll put it in the Slack so you can all play with it. We start in Interface Builder with a UI view controller, which contains only its default UI view. So here is the UI view controller with its default UI view. So this super view for all the other views, I call that the outermost view. You can call it the default view. It is self.view in the view controller. That's what we're talking about. Hang on one sec. We add a UI view as a subview. Cool, we've done that before, and change its background color to make it identifiable. Now open the device configuration pane by clicking the View As button at the bottom left. The device configuration is this guy right here. So we'll open it, and let's see what it says to do next. Device pane allows us to select a device orientation and adaptation if an iPad device is selected. In the image above, the selected device is an iPhone 8 Plus and the orientation is portrait. The device configuration pane, blah, blah, blah. Width, size, we'll add constraints for our first layout variation, iPhone in portrait orientation. We hit this button, vary for traits, introduce variations on width and height, and I can select the phones that I want to work on. So I've got all these changes, and we're saying for this specific device, here are the variations on those constraints that we had before. So I'm going to let you go through this. For now, I want to focus on one set of constraints for our apps. But this would probably be pretty cool to do. I think it's a stretch, though. Like, you don't really need to know that right now. You might in a work setting. So that's a really, really good question. Boom. Cool. So we can do 2 pretty high-level things here. We can make apps for different types of phones, and we can make apps that only work in certain orientations. Neato. Adam. This guy? Yep. Yep.
So like, there's not like a better way to put time actually. What if I have like, I don't know, like 20 elements on my screen and like constraints like inside?
Yeah, it can get messy really quickly. I guess is the question, like, can I put them in folders or stuff?
Yeah, you know, not assigning like any elements that they organize.
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever tried to do that. Let's see what we can do if I select a couple of them. So say for the label and its relationship to the safe area. Do you guys all see, again, how the names here, label.center x and label.center y, those are attributes of a thing called label, which is an instance of label, and they correspond exactly to what we see over here on the side panel. What is this called? Inspectors. Say that again? No, I'm just saying, like, just remember that a label is an instance of a UI label, and we're setting a specific property on it. And what we're actually setting is, we are saying the center Y is equal to whatever safe area center Y is. That's what the actual constraint is. So think of them both as instances of a type. Let's see if we can do something with them. I'm not sure. I don't really know, actually. That's a good question. Let me get back to you. Like how better to organize them, right? How to org constraints better. But yes, I think in there was a question like if I just look at it on the right side, I think that's probably more meaningful. Yeah. How do you all feel about constraints? You don't like it? Tell me a little bit more about why you don't like it.
It's a lot of red.
A lot of what?
Red.
Red?
And it takes a lot of time to get the right population. It's not just going to be a button label. If we do text to it, we've got more text.
It's true. Don't forget stack views. What's a stack view, Ram?
Well, it's special view that can have multiple views arranged inside it. Yeah, so like how those views are arranged. Back
Interesting. So down here on this bottom bar, if you click a label, if you remember all of our constraints are set there, and we did that by clicking and dragging, two-finger clicking and dragging. We can also set up some other constraints, such as how far horizontally in its container it should be. Oh no. Align to super view is conflicting with align to safe view. So what this is saying is you try to center this view on two different things, or the value or the placement for our view in relation to those things is different. Because I said, let's center it on X in the safe space, which centered X is probably in the middle for the safe space and the super view. But I tried to say center X in the super view, but shift it over 12 points here. So you can say, let's get rid of this constraint. I got rid of the center to the safe area, and now this label is still looking at what it is to be centered in X. So it's saying, I want to look at the center in X, but be 12 points further than it, horizontally. So watch what's happening. I hit Control Z, and I add that first constraint back. This is perfectly centered, but I've got this red line, which is a real pain in the butt. If you've got a red line, your app's not going to crash, but your constraints might not work how you think they should. That's weird. Your view controller is going to try to lay these out in the best way that it can, But if you've got yellow or red errors here, you probably want to resolve either the misplaced views or the unused constraints or these conflicting constraints. It's saying that these two constraints, if I tried to implement them, would make this thing be in different places. I think it chooses one. I don't know how it chooses them. But it wants me to resolve the conflict. And then that red line is going to go away if I get rid of the constraint that causes the conflict. So either center x and center x are the same value. So if I said this is centered for x in the super view, now that red line goes away. Or if I say, actually I only need one centered x constraint, and I just get rid of one, it's going to also deal with that. So I think this is the thing that Allison said about a lot of red. You're going to see a lot of red, and that's going to mean it doesn't know how it should position your views based on what you told it to do with constraints. So I think that's the most important part of today's lesson. It's pretty easy to click and drag. The problems that you're going to get with auto layout almost entirely will come into play when you've specified conflicting options for your constraints. You're going to see that a ton because your lab is literally all about how do I place things in relation to each other in my super view. You're going to just use UI views. You're not even going to do coding, but you're going to have to figure out how you make the boxes look like the screen. Do you want to see the lab?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the lab. Check this out. So here's our lab. So given the images below, create a view controller that copies the images. You can do this all in Interface Builder. It must follow the specs from the images in both portrait and landscape on iPhones and iPads. Question 1. These have equal width and height. They're pinned to the edges, so there's no space between them and the edge of the screen. And there is greater than a 0 margin between them, so there's some space. That's step 1. So you'll probably set some constraints for that. And actually, just a helpful hint, if something's all the way on the margin and you can't drag it to like the view there, you can go to the document outline and you could just click and drag to the view there. So you don't just have to do the 2-finger click in the space. You can look at the outline and select that same label and click and drag it to the view. And it's the same thing as click and drag here, because this is from the label to that default or outermost view. Oh, there was gum in my pocket. Doing that will bring up the same options as doing this. Neat, huh? All right, let's keep going. Question 2. Whoa. Change it up. Make it so that this guy, the width of this purple one is half of the screen, and it's pinned to the edges. So what do you think its relationship to the top and the bottom of the safe space is going to be? How many points? I agree. It's going to be 0 from there. Then you're going to have 3 boxes on the other side that all have the same width as this purple one. And then they are all going to be equally spaced between each other. I would say make them all the same size to make it easier for yourself. Allison.
Or are we committing, this is my first storyboard?
That.
Okay.
So think of these as steps. Commit after each question, after you figured it out. Sorry? Yeah. So at each commit, we can go through and see, did you do that? Question 2. Question 3. Whoa. Now we start to put things inside of other things. Is this a stack view? Whoa, what is a stack view? I don't know, we haven't gone through it. Let's see if stack views exist. Are they in our object library? Stack. Oh, a stack view. Arranges views linearly. Should I use that? I don't know, I've never used the stack view. I don't know how to code. Drag it? Wait, let's try it out. Is that what you're suggesting? I think that's a great idea. Let's try it out.
I want Z-axis now.
One Z-axis empty?
Stacking.
Stem. Oh, I don't know. Different than this. So in a stack view, you're going to put stuff inside of the view. And the way that you can do it is you can click this button. So this was the align button. This is the stack button. Embed in this selected view, let's say another view. Sorry, I got that wrong. I did it in reverse. This embed in means for the currently selected item. Oh, I love talking. For whatever view is currently selected, put that inside of one of these options. So put the label inside of a view without inset. Let's not worry about inset until you get really, really comfortable with outlets. A scroll view, which we really don't want to use right now, trust me. And the stack view. Cool, so now I've got, whoa, what is the relationship between my label and my stack view now? What do you guys think? It's inside of it, and like, what would we say the label is to the stack view, or what the stack view is to the label? Anthony. All right, Ayula. It's like the parent, and when we're talking about things in our view, what's their relationship? Yeah. So when we're talking about views, we say super view and sub view. Sunny.
Why can't we just create another view as opposed to that view? So you can have objects within a view.
We can have objects within a view. That's so true. We could embed our stack view within a view. Now our view is the superclass to the stack view, which is the superclass to the label. The label's kind of like the grandkid of the view. We could totally do that. Iran, why did you want to use a stack view? What can we do in there? Oh. So if I put like 3 labels in there, and I looked at the stack view, and I looked at the attributes, it'd say, what's the spacing for these things? And it creates the vertical spacing between these vertically spaced elements. So this is a stack view for elements that we want some vertical spacing for. There's also a stack view for horizontal. And so look how much easier it is to use than constraints. That's nice. Like a collection view. There is a collection view. That's a really cool thing. Yeah, a collection view controller is not something we want to use right now. Tomorrow we're going to learn about how to use collections of data in something called a table view controller, which makes up like pretty much every app you've used in some way. So that's cool. Rod. Like that? Like over there? Now it's out of the stack view. So its super view is no longer the stack view. because I've pulled it out of the stack view. So everything that's in a stack view, think of like a stack view as a protocol. Everything in the stack view must conform to, in the very least, the spacing property of the stack view. You have to do what they say to do in the stack view. Ian?
You made it vertical stack view. You made it vertical and horizontal stack view, or
I honestly have no idea, and so I want to go talk to my friend.
what is the question?
Can a stack view be vertical and horizontal? The exact layout varies depending on the stack view's axis distribution alignment. Drag either a horizontal or a vertical. So let's talk about what that would look like. Right now we're saying this stack view is vertical because we want things to be on top of each other. A horizontal would be like, I want things to be next to each other. I'm not really sure what the relationship would be if it was both vertical and horizontal.
You gotta make a stack view, three stack views vertical, and then make those stack views horizontally. Like take the vertical stack
Whoa.
views and make them horizontal stack views.
I love it. Let's do that. Oh, hang on.
Nested stack views.
Can we have nested stack views? Thank you for telling me what I'm going to Google. Can stack views be nested in IB? Auto layout, nested stack views. What? Interface builder. This whole program. Okay, let me start from the outside maybe. I will create a, nope. I will create a vertical stack view. Come on there, buddy. All right. And then within my vertical stack view, I want to put those stack views. I want the spacing in this horizontal stack view to be 10. And I want the horizontal space, the vertical spacing in each of these stack views to be 10. So you see how the horizontal stack view now has to expand to accommodate this first stack view. I can make the different stack views in here do different stuff as well. You can all play with this some more. The answer to the question is yeah, you can put things in there. Notice where this last stack view, whose spacing do you guys hate this? Okay. This last stack view, whose spacing I haven't adjusted, it tries to, this is a helpful hint, it tries to space from the bottom of the stack view that it's in. It's not trying to fit to the top. So it's not aligning to the top, it's aligning to the bottom. You can change the alignment. You can change, let's say, come on, work how I want you to. You can change it to be centered, for example. But that, what it's doing, is it's centering all the labels in the vertical stack view. If I want these stack views to be centered, I would say center them in my horizontal stack view. So this is like an example I probably shouldn't have gotten into at all. But you're going to use stack views in today's assignment. Do you want to look at the assignment some more? Okay. So here's the thing with some stuff in it. Maybe you can figure out how to do that. You could literally just use a view and plop it on another view. But maybe you can use a stack view. Because later you got to do stuff like this. Wow, they tell you the explicit width and height. That's really nice. And then they also tell you like the width and height of the purple one is going to be related to that. And then they tell you some more stuff. And then you add some labels and an input. Nice. text field, we saw that yesterday. I think the really nice thing is we don't have to do anything with our text field. But look what we do. It's like an art project. That's true. So in the end, you're going to end up with this guy. And since we haven't really... Do you want to tell us what Fibonacci is?
Put me on the spot, David.
Okay, I got it.
It's like the golden ratio where you incrementally increase your value. And in this case, it's like a spirals out and increases in this case, it's my numbers.
Okay. It's a math concept, right? So this math concept, which you probably could see in an interview because they love making people implement it, is if I add up the previous two numbers in the sequence, they create the next number. So it starts with the number 1, which if you add it to the previous two numbers is 1 and 0. So you get 1. Then if you add 1 and 1, you get 2. If you get 2 and 1, you get 3. If you add 3 and 2, you get 5. If you add, and so on. And so what I might suggest to you for making this visually is that there are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 elements here. You should create a ratio of the screen height to how wide and how tall these boxes need to be. If we look vertically, let's just look at the two biggest boxes. This 13 and this 8 are saying that the proportion horizontally in the screen should be something out of 21. So if we looked at the screen and we measured how big it is, there's definitely a way to do that. This should be 13 21sts of the height, high, and this should be 8 21sts of the height, high. Then this could be 5 21st, that could be 3 21st, 2, 1, 1. Weird. You gotta do some math. Maybe you can do some math with your constraints. Do you think you can do some math with your constraints? Is there a way to like create a ratio in constraints? Is there? Is there a way to create a ratio with your constraints? Okay. That is advice I've taken to heart. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I want to make sure you all know, because this lab is really great because it makes you do auto layout. I kind of don't want to tell you any more about auto layout. What are some questions you have about auto layout, though? No. I really want you all to struggle through this, because if you struggle today, when you create apps in the future, you will not struggle as much.
Can you do an example of something that
We did plenty of examples here. Like it's really like adapting to visual space. It's adapting to how you use your eyes to make things laid out, and that's not something I can model for you. I can show you how the thing works, but you got to model it, come up with being frustrated, or frustrated, as they say in the New York accent. So, sorry, no. Ian.
taking an element on the screen and getting it to the top or the left or the right. If we were like rotated, would it then expand back to go with the width of the screen?
This is such a nice way of asking his same question, I think. And because it was actionable, I'm going to do it. Nothing against you, Albert, but you didn't manipulate me in the right way. So let's take a view. And let's just say I want the view to be that wide and that tall. I can say view to view. It should be centered horizontally. I'm going to get some red stuff because it doesn't like what I've done yet. And I'm going to say it should be centered vertically as it is here. If I look at my constraints, it says it should be centered, and it doesn't like that. It's going to say it needs constraint for the actual x position or the width. So I've told it it's going to be centered and it's going to be centered, but it doesn't know how far, how wide, and yeah, it doesn't know how wide it should be. So if I tell it my x position, like I want you to be, I don't know, I want our leading space to be what it is currently, then it doesn't protest anymore. Because I've told it, hey, I'm centered to the screen right now. So let me make this like orange. I am centered to the screen right now. And I am also, my leading space to the screen, which is this constraint, is 0. So if I'm centered and my leading space is 0, then it can figure out that, okay, this has to be symmetrical. So my trailing space is going to be the same as my leading space if it's centered. This is where, like, if you do it, it makes so much more sense than me telling you. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. If you make this exact thing I'm making now, it will start you on your lab. So leading and trailing space is the horizontal orientation. Top and bottom space is the vertical orientation. So I said that this is centered, and relative to the safe area, the leading part of the safe area, it is 0 points from that. So it's all the way to the edge. And because it's centered, it's saying, hey, if a box is going to be centered and it's stretched all the way to the boundaries from the middle on one side, wow. I think drawing stuff would really help for UI. Sorry about that. So it's saying, on my screen, I want you to be down the middle. That's what we told it. We didn't tell it, okay, if your center is in the middle, how far away should I go? But then we said its leading space should be 0. So if it's down the middle and its leading space is 0, it goes all the way to the edge of the safe space. And then if it's going to remain centered, that means that it must be the same distance from the trailing space. So to get all the way from the boundaries, if it's centered, all you got to do is either set the width or set the leading or trailing space to the safe space. This is me demonstrating. When you do it, it makes more sense. I promise. But let's keep answering the question that was asked. It needs me to add a Y constraint. So if I set bottom or top space, I'm going to set top space because it's aligned right along with the top. Great. Now, it takes up the whole screen up to the safe area. That's not what I wanted. I'm going to get rid of align Y. I'm going to change the height back to what I wanted it to be. And so it says I need a height. If I give it this height, it's okay with what I did. The height is a number, right? The height is a number of points. That's going to be static. It's not going to change based on my screen, which let me make sure the orientation are all available. Great. So whatever I do, the height's going to be 408 points. But the width is relative. So it loads, and then when I turn the screen, it's still 408 points high, which is pretty much all of the vertical space in the screen here. But now it's also trying to extend its width to to have no leading space to the safe area, so no space right before the button there, and to be aligned in the center, which means it's stretching all the way to the other side of the safe area as well. So now if I rotate it, what's going on there? Upside down. Let's just make sure you work. Okay, cool. So upside down, it's working like we expect. The safe area, the top of the safe area is actually right here. This is upside down. So it's 408 points from there, and then it's stretched all the way to the boundaries. That makes sense. Now when I rotate it horizontally, we get that. Rotate it again. I gotta figure out why this is happening actually. Icons don't support upside down? Oh. iPhones upside down. Why not work? Doesn't want you using your phone upside down. That's just use your loaf. Let's see what use your loaf is about. Oh, this is actually a good site. Have you wondered why your app doesn't rotate to, bless you, upside down on the phone but works on the iPad? How about preventing your app from rotating at all or blah, blah, blah. You can do the stuff that we did. Thanks, Aram. The assumption for a universal app is that you support all of the orientations on an iPad and all orientations except upside down. You can change that, but the assumption is that it works. So let's see. We can look at our info.keylist. We can look at the properties of our app. And if you want to get started on your lab and set this out, that is also totally fine. Let's see what's going on. Assumption that we'd be wanting for, you can confirm this by looking at info. Know the default key has 3 values. If I click this, and I can say, we change the iPhone supported orientations using either the universal or the iPhone. So if we go back to our project, we can see some stuff here. Yeah, it seems like it's set for universal, and it's set for iPhone. I really don't know why this is happening, so let's keep figuring it out together. This is not enough to set up the info.plist. Suppose I want to support upside down. I select it, it doesn't rotate upside down. What's going on? This is a good site. Useyourloaf.com. Understanding which orientation it can use is tricky. There are 3 factors: device support, application support, view controller support. Not all devices support all orientations. iPads support all orientations, but iPhones don't. New ones don't have a home button and use Face ID. Apple doesn't want you using these phones upside down, as Face ID doesn't work in that orientation. It doesn't matter if you select upside down in the target settings. The newer phones ignore the upside down orientation. Interesting. Apple doesn't make it easy, which is perhaps a hint not to do it. Okay. It's a really good quitting point when Apple says, don't do it. Those assholes. Let's take a look. Let's go to our simulator. If I hit Command-Shift-H, it hides our current thing. If I look at maps, turn it. It doesn't want to let me do it. But what did it tell us? It does support it on older phones. Oh, this is really not a good program on simulator. Let me rotate more slowly. What? I don't know, man. I think they just made it to be passive aggressive towards Google Maps. So what they said is, it seems not to work on new phones. We can run this on an older phone and see what happens. Let's do an iPhone 5S. Duke it out. Wow, I can run two simulators next to each other? No way. Wow, it has to load up? Cool. Does anyone have any questions? I know. And it's not that I don't trust you. It's just, it's not happening. 4710 Austell Place. Austell, thank you. Safety warning. It picked an, where did it pick that Pizza Hut? Is it Iowa? All right, we're going to Iowa, class. This is the secret tomorrow. It's not raining in Iowa, so we're going to go there. All right. So this is right side up. Please rotate. This is turned again. This is upside down. I didn't wait for it to rotate, so I think it's probably messed up. Let's start it right side up again. I trust. I just want to see if the instructions that they gave us, I wanted to see if that worked. Okay, let's look at an iPad. This is also a very good question. What happens when you make an app for an iPhone on an iPad? What do you expect to happen? What does our current app do? And we expect it to be, I've never really used an iPad. I don't know what to do. 408 high, and then fill all the way horizontally. I thought iPads were supposed to go upside down. What's going on? Why don't these devices do what they're supposed to? What's that? Apple said no. Okay. It's quitting time then. But important to note is that no matter the device we ran it on, the height was 408. And because we were centered and our leading space to the safe area was 0, it took up the whole space horizontally. So it worked the same on each of those phones. It would rotate?
No, like not all that black space.
Yeah, I don't really know how iPads work. Can you say that again? Ooh, interesting. Ooh, interesting. Ooh, interesting. So maybe we'd need to do something with our view controller. I don't know. But on a universal app, that's what it tries to do. If you've only made an iPhone app, it tries to run as much visual information as it can get. Phoenix. Sorry, which it? This. Make what equal to what? Sorry. I'm going to leave that to you. Oh, okay. Just think of this. We go to part 1. Think of this as just using all the available space. It's a different phone, but think of this as the safe space. So use the safe space as your boundaries. It's going to be so much fun. What's the game the kids play? Roblox? Is this similar to that? No? No? Not at all. Okay, Rod? Okay. I'm going to stop recording, but we can keep going.